What's up everyone? Thanks for tuning in today, I appreciate it. In this video, I'm going to fulfill a request a subscriber made and talk about patterning your gun. Now I'm going to do this in two videos. I'm going to talk about actually patterning and some of the finer details of it in this video. In another video later on, I'm going to actually go out and show you how I pattern my gun and go through these steps. See you in a second. Alright, so thanks for the video idea. I really appreciate it. I love getting video ideas from you guys. Helps me keep content that y'all like coming, and it also gives me great new ideas. So thank you guys for that, and be sure and keep those coming. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the finer details of patterning your gun. Let's start with shotgun shells. I think this is an important aspect of patterning your gun because different shells are obviously going to produce a different result. So what I mean by that is, for example, whenever I shot my Perazzi shotgun, I love the Fiocchi brand of shells because it worked perfect through that. But then whenever I switched to Krieghoff, for example, I found the Fiocchis didn't work as well, but Remingtons worked better. Now I'm not saying that's true in every scenario, I'm just saying that for me personally, that's what I experienced whenever the difference between those two guns. That's not necessarily something that's true over all Krieghoffs or all Perazzis or any brand of gun, but that's something I noticed. So my point is, different shells are going to pattern in different ways. So what I prefer to do is to pattern with a shell that I'm going to be shooting the most in competition. So for me, that's going to be a Remington STS, and I'm going to be using the singles load to pattern my singles, the handicap load to pattern my handicaps, and doubles to pattern my doubles. Now, whenever I go to the pattern board, I'm going to stand right around 30 yards away from the board. So, for example, I'm just going to go to the pattern board and back up 30 yards. But whenever I go shoot doubles, I want to stand a little bit closer, especially on the first target more particularly. I'm going to stand about 15 to 20 yards because it's the closest target. You're shooting it way faster than you're shooting any other target in trap shooting. So you may want to keep that in mind. So for illustrative purposes, I decided to bring this black board in here. This square or rectangle, I guess is probably a better term for it, that I've drawn represents your pattern paper. Now, pattern paper, this is kind of something that's different. You can use paper, and you also see grease boards commonly used where you have a board, it's typically circular, and you just take grease and you grease it, and then you can see your pattern in that board. Now, I use paper most of the time, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of talk about it from that perspective, but you're going to need an aim point. So for the paper, you can get it, if you're wondering, you can get it anywhere pretty well. I've even used to use Walmart gift wrap paper. It works pretty well, so it's pretty cheap to get, so you don't have to shell out a lot of cash. So, but you're going to need a point of aim. So I think a lot of people, they'll aim like right in the middle of the pattern board right here. The problem with that theory sometimes is that you may not get to see your entire pattern. So for example, in a sporting clays type scenario, if you're patterning a sporting clays gun, you may shoot closer to a 50% pattern or a 60%, 40% pattern. Now what I mean by those numbers is, let's say I'm going to go out off of our pattern board here, but let's say you're aiming right here. So this represents your shot, this circle. 50% of it's going to be above and 50% of it is going to be below, or actually that's probably more like 60-40 because of my lack of drawing skills, but that's what that means, is that's what I'm referring to. So 100% pattern would mean that 100% of the shot is above where you're aiming at. So just right at the bottom is where your pattern is. So whenever I'm patterning a trap gun, I'm going to set my aim point on the paper in the lower quarter of that pattern paper that I'm using, just because that allows me to see all of my pattern up here and all of my pattern down here. And that gives me a little bit better picture of what I'm looking at. So for example, for me, I'm going to shoot about 90, 10, 100% high, one of those two. I'm going to be somewhere in that ballpark. So that gives me the ability to see the 10% that's down here and the 90% that's up above. So that's kind of what I'm talking about there. Patterning your gun is very important, but also it's something that you don't want to necessarily get stuck on. So I've gone to the pattern board a lot, and I've had a gun that looked like it fit perfectly. The pattern was right where I wanted it, but it didn't necessarily fit me perfect for trap shooting. You gotta remember, whenever you're shooting on the pattern board, you're shooting at a stationary target. Whenever you're shooting trap, you're shooting a moving target. So there is a little bit of difference there. So a lot of times what I like to do after I get through patterning my gun is I'll go ahead and go up to the field. I'll get it set on post 3, and I'll set the trap machine on straightaways, single straightaways. That allows me the ability to just sit there and say, okay, am I hanging a big old smoke ball? Whenever I get it to the point that everything is comfortable and I'm hanging big smoke balls, I'm going to gradually move back all the way back to the 27-yard line and make sure that I'm hammering them. So that's kind of what I like to follow up with on the pattern board. It helps me get in my mind where my gun's at, where I want it to be at, and what minor adjustments. Honestly, at that point, the most adjustment that I've ever made is about 2 or 3 clicks on a rib, either up or down on the rib of the barrel. So, it's not going to be a major adjustment, but it's just kind of that final fine-tuning, if you will, that's important. One last aspect of the pattern board that I do want to cover here is what your pattern should look like. Now, obviously, everybody's going to be different in terms of if they want, 90% of their pattern above where they're aiming at, or 100%, or they want 60% of it down here. Everybody's going to be different. It's going to depend on what discipline of you're shooting, whether you're shooting sporting clays, whether you're shooting trap, whether you're shooting skeet, and you're also your personal preference. But one thing that I think that you do need to make sure that you're doing is that all of it lines up in the center of where you're aiming at. So, for example, I don't want my pattern starting over here and being like that, where all my pattern is essentially on the right side of where I'm aiming at. I want it to be right in the middle of where I'm aiming at horizontally. Now, vertically, as far as how much of your pattern is up here, how much of it's down here, that's personal preference, but you want it to be lined up in the middle in a horizontal fashion so that whenever you're shooting, your pattern's not on the right side of where you're aiming at, it's not on the left side, it's perfectly in the middle. Another quick little tip that I do want to give here too is make sure that whenever you go pattern your gun that you kind of give a few dry fires, if you will, whether it's putting a snap cap in your gun is probably the best way to do that. Just take a snap cap out there, stick it in your gun, and just dry fire a few times. I had a professional shooter that actually went to his clinic, and he said, pattern your gun, but before you do that, I want you to dry fire your gun. And so we stuck a deal down in there, and I went bang, and I went like this. I just flinched. So obviously that's going to throw your patterning off. So take a snap cap out there, dry fire a few rounds just to make sure that you're steady, and once you do that, go ahead and pattern your gun. Also, make sure that you're using the choke that you're going to be shooting with. You want to try to simulate as close as you can with the shells, with your choke, everything really. You want to simulate as close as you can to what you're using in competition. So I'm going to do a video later on detailing me going through this process, actually patterning my gun, so you guys will actually get to see that. So thank you for the video idea. I really appreciate it. This was a good one. You can subscribe to my channel here, and I appreciate it if you did that. You can watch another video here. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great rest of your day.